How's it going, everybody? Delightful Eon here. In this video, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the collapse of civilization. I do believe we are at or near a point where civilization is going to collapse. I would define that as any time within the next 50 years. I do believe that civilization will face serious strains to the point that it will no longer be sustainable for civilization to continue as it has been. That's what I would define as collapse, and I do believe we will see wars and famine and death and destruction and various other things that go along with a society collapsing. So that's what we're going to be dissecting here in this video. I think one of the strongest trends that has been consistent throughout my lifetime is the increase and increasing pervasiveness of technology. Technology is now everywhere. There is no escape from it. There is really nowhere you can go where you will not in some way have technology influence you. You know, even if you go out into the middle of the woods, you're still going to have planes flying overhead. And this is really a paradigm shift in how humans have lived for hundreds of thousands of years. And with increasing automation, increasing connectivity, this will naturally come with more pushback from people who are working jobs that could be automated for, efficiency. So the transition from an economy where people have to work to an economy where people maybe don't have to work anymore is a very violent transition. It is not going to be something that is going to happen without significant pushback, in my personal opinion. And I think that can offer a lot of pressure and cause a lot of strain on the system. So that would be one little trend that I'm noticing. I'm going to build up my argument with a couple of these more macro points, and I'll tie it all in the end. So that's one argument. We have this technological onslaught constantly increasing, specialization constantly increasing, leaving more and more people behind, more and more people feeling like they can't participate in society. It's not enough just to be a good member of your community anymore. You have to achieve something great. So the standards have been totally shifted because now we're in a more globalized market. So that's one thing that I'm noticing is technology and specialization leaving more and more people behind, producing more and more goods, but leaving more and more people unfulfilled. Another trend I noticed that I believe is pretty severe is climate change. I know some people don't, believe it's a big problem. I personally disagree with them. But this is one of the things that I believe will be a big, have a huge impact on the world and how everything operates. When you look at some of the IPCC reports and various other reports relating to climate change, you realize how serious this problem has the potential of being. Again, it's more of a longer-term problem. 20 to 30 years, I think we'll start to really notice the effects to where it'll be undeniable to even those most stringent of deniers. So I think we're going to see rising sea levels. That's going to cause people on the coast to have to move inland. People from the southern regions are going to want to move north due to increasing heat and increasing disease and viruses, which are going to pop up due to people having to be in air-conditioned environments more. You're going to see supply chains under strain as the ability to produce things will be more difficult because you're going to have workers having to work in harsher environments. Mixed in with Category 5 and 6 and even 7 hurricanes, they're going to expand the scale of climate events because the severity is increasing. I mean, we saw a tornado touchdown in Kentucky, I believe it was, just 2 weeks ago, and it was 240 miles an hour, and it stayed on the ground for 200 miles. That's one example of where, normally tornadoes or twisters don't do that for that extended period of time, but this one did because of the humidity shifts and various things like that. You also could experience food supply shortages, water shortages, but that's just another layer of this cake. That's just another part of this argument I'm trying to make, that we are accelerating towards a sort of collapse, and I'm trying to paint a picture about what this is going to look like. The third thing I would say is economics. I think economically we are approaching a very serious problem. When you look at the birth rates and the fertility rates of countries, they're falling at a very rapid rate. I believe this was caused by I don't think human nature is necessarily monogamous. I'm not saying it shouldn't be that way, but I think that's more of it's a way to build an efficient system, because you have a nuclear family, and that nuclear family produces for itself, and then they consume, and then, it was more of an economic model than it was necessarily a model for humans historically. If you look at humans historically, it was mostly people in villages and little communities, and they were mostly polygamous. People would have kids, and no one would really even know if the kid was yours or not. You would just take care of it because it was a part of your tribe. So that was more orchestrated towards, I don't want to say female nature, but I believe that was more the female dynamic, where, hey, we take care of the children just because they're children. But then you have the male dynamic, which is more, I don't want to take care of a kid that's not mine. And I think that the friction between the sexes in that way will have a very profound effect on... Sorry, I'm a little bit sick right now. But I believe that friction will have a very profound effect on birth rates going forward. Women will struggle to find males who are producing as much, because the simple fact is there's just not an economy capable of providing enough high-paying jobs for people to actually, have a stay-at-home wife or a stay-at-home husband, even for that matter. So there's a whole friction there, and the transition from monogamy. And you're even seeing polygamy start to come back to the forefront when you look at things like pornography and, OnlyFans and all of these various other technological advancements. And that's basically what's going on, is women are getting attention from a lot of guys through online mediums. And guys get attention from girls too. It's just not to the same degree. So I believe that's another fundamental transition, and that affects the entire economy, right? If you have less people, you're going to have less consumers, you're going to have less producers, and you can offset it with automation to some degree, but you're going to get that pushback from people who are losing their jobs. It's just a very difficult thing to navigate, especially if it's a inefficient government. So that's a big problem that I think we're facing in terms of maintaining housing values and stock values. How do you grow the stock market? How do you grow the housing market if there's less and less people consuming? I mean, you might be able to produce just as much due to automation, but you're not going to be able to, have that kind of growth in your retirement and things like that. And there's going to be services and businesses that are going to be shutting down because there's just no consumers in areas. And that'll kind of be like a plague that'll slowly chip away at the hollowed out economy that remains. So that's a third wave that we're facing, this polygamy and monogamy mixing in with the economy, causing lower birth and fertility rates, climate change also adding plastics into the water and various things that could be affecting fertility rates. Then you have you have the debt market. You look at the amount of debt out there. I think the U.S. has like $30 trillion in debt. It's basically unpayable. I mean, when you put it in perspective, right? You have $30 trillion in debt, but you're going to have a declining population. So you're going to have fewer and fewer shoulders to hold that burden, and that'll just be an untenable situation, especially when there's no political will to address the big spending items, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, or the military. And old people are never going to vote to take those programs away. Therefore, the young people are going to be essentially enslaved to take care of the older people. So that type of transition also is going to, that's a more macroeconomic issue, but it is an issue. It's a serious problem. And when one debt market goes down, the United States might not be the first one to go down, but when one market goes down, it's like a domino effect. The others are going to follow. So that's another one of these issues. And you got to factor in all the increased spending that's going to be required to address climate change, to address falling fertility rates. I'm guessing they're going to throw a bunch of money at that to try to reverse it. But it's not really going to work based on my research, because the culture of the society has been shifted and shattered in such a way to where you're not going to rebuild that by just papering over it with money. You have a real cultural problem. People don't feel like they have meaning. They don't feel like they have religious ties anymore. Like, there's a lot of things going on that's causing that. So that's another, of the more macro issues that I believe will cause a collapse in civilization. Not every civilization will collapse equally, but I believe they all will collapse because it's a globalized economy now. If the United States or China or Russia or Germany or any, semi-major economy goes down due to war or strife, that's going to shatter the whole global system. Our stock market doesn't stay up if, another country falls, especially if it's a relatively, prosperous country. So that's another one of these more macro issues that is chipping away at civilization at a fairly rapid rate. You have to look at the decline in marriages, which is being caused by, student loan debt, unattainable housing for the younger generation. I mean, the average person, let's say, earns about $45,000. That really is, what the average person is earning. But the average house is probably costing, $450,000. I'm not in one of the wealthier states. I'm in probably like a middle tier state, you would say, in terms of like the price of housing. But, even where I'm at, somewhere in the Midwest, it's still the disparity between income and housing cost is extreme to a very severe degree that it was not like in previous generations. So that makes it very difficult for people to leave their houses. Like, there's a lot that's going on here that, is specifically affecting the younger generation. And ultimately, they're the generation who's going to be producing all the stuff. They're the generation that's going to be maintaining the economy, helping the old people, running the governments. And if they can't even get their foot in the door in terms of upper level jobs, because a lot of the older people don't retire and free up those, higher paying positions, that's just another, needle in the spine of this problem. So that's another, problem that is being faced by the younger generation that I think is going to have longer term effects. This inability to really get your foot in the door and get started and get real momentum going at a solid position. So that's another one of the more macro issues that we face. So I think you couple all that together, declining population, international strife, economic collapse due to falling fertility rates and birth rates, monogamy and polygamy, the inability of the younger generation to get a solid foothold, politicians using words lazily in order to win power in democracies and representative governments, but never really addressing the long-term structural issues. I don't like our odds. I look at it, I think it'll be a very structured collapse. I think they'll structure it with technology as best they can, but I believe it will be a collapse. It will be, the dominoes will fall, so to speak. It's just a question of when. It's a question of how long can they maintain this quote-unquote stability before the system really starts to fall apart, and then we, go through a very, serious time. It could be similar to a dark ages where, the technology gets shut off because there's war and blackouts and, famine and just a lack of ability to produce the necessary goods to maintain civilization. So I think all of those things coupled together are going to lead to big problems. And I really don't, another thing is I really don't see any politicians really talking about this stuff, which is how it's going to be bad. I mean, if they're not even talking about this stuff yet, if they're not talking about it in 10 years from now, they're not going to start talking about it until it's right at our doorstep. And then by the time you do that, it's way too late. If we had a full-on assault on these issues right now, like we fleshed out how to build a society for men and women to, cooperate and, have children and actually be stable, to where it benefits both of them. Like, there has to be a way to do that. Build a society where the younger generation can actually have housing that's relatively affordable and isn't, 10, 15 times your income. Build a society where climate change would be addressed. Like, if we started addressing these issues seriously right now, maybe we could squeak by. But I don't see any indication that, democratic or representative governments are going to do that. You might see a little bit of movement in China, in a more aggressive manner, but that's because they have a top-down system. But, in an ironic sense, the only system really capable of addressing these kind of issues might be that kind of top-down system. It would not surprise me if in the longer term we see a lot of democratic or representative governments slide into a type of authoritarian model where you have one person in charge, because that's really the only system capable of fixing these types of problems, where you have one person in charge who says, all right, you're doing this, you're doing that, and I'm not going to debate it with you because I'm the dictator. That might be the only model capable of really fixing these problems, because, a democratic system where everyone has their own opinion and everyone's going to voice their own opinion and everyone's going to object every single step of the way, you're just not going to get the necessary progress to address these really big macro problems. And then it'll naturally deteriorate to the point where an authoritarian will take over, because people will want an authoritarian to take over. That's the irony of it, is like all the people in the democratic and representative governmental systems, by actually, fighting so fervently for what they want, they're enabling the authoritarian type of system to take hold. Because eventually things do collapse and someone does end up in charge. And usually it's the person with the guns, or the person with the, military know-how to take over. And then you're, in an authoritarian system where that person pretty much makes all the rules, and then you don't get to do basically anything you want, or very, in a much more limited sense. So that's what I believe is going to happen. I believe we are at the collapse of civilization, or nearing it, probably I would say within my lifetime. I would confidently say I would be very surprised if our system held together until the end of this century. I would be very, very surprised by that, especially when you look at the totality of the problems. I just don't think there's any way, the government navigates through those issues. And I think these issues are bigger than anything we've ever faced. There's never been an issue, people will cite, well, we've had viruses and we've had diseases and we've had, civil wars, and we've had all this stuff throughout human history. But I don't think we've ever faced an issue where it's like, all right, people aren't having enough kids. How do we reverse that? And you really can't, because it's a cultural problem. That's the irony of it, is a lot of these countries in Europe particularly, they're dumping money at it, thinking that's going to solve it, but that's really not a solution. You look at a country like Israel, they actually have fairly stable fertility rates. And the reason is because they have a unified culture, a unified religion, basically, and they have a common enemy where, on the people on the outside. And generally, when you have those three things, a unified people / religion, a common enemy, and a stable enough economic situation where you can, see a future, that is how you're going to get an increase in population growth. But you're not going to have that in most modern systems until things really start to fall apart. And by then, it's way too late. So that's kind of my opinion on what's going to happen in the future. Not fun times, but it'll be interesting times, I'll tell you that. Make sure to hit the subscribe button down below.